Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back, and if you are new, thanks for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today, I am very excited to be talking about the books that I read in June. I finished a total of 13 books, and I DNF'd one. I know, who am I? I don't normally DNF a book, and most likely I will go back to this book at some point. So I'm going to start there. I was supposed to buddy read The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas with Michael from Michael Romeo Talks Books. But neither one of us were really loving this book, so we decided to put it aside. For me, I got to chapter 16, and it was just okay. I wasn't loving it, and I know so many people do love it, so I always give the book the benefit of the doubt that maybe it was the wrong book at the wrong time. So I will try again another time. And I'm hoping that Michael and I can find, something else that we both want to read, because I was really looking forward to buddy reading with him, so hopefully we can still do that. So now for the books that I actually did finish. The first book that I finished was a reread, and it begins like this. I hope I will be able to confide everything to you, as I have never been able to confide in anyone, and I hope you will be a great source of comfort and support. And this is from The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. And I originally read this many years ago when I was in grade 7. And this time around, I read it along with AJ from AJ Dunn Reads and Writes and the group read that they were hosting. And reading this as an adult was a very different experience for sure. I also read the definitive collection this time around, which has, some things in it that the original publication didn't. Everyone probably knows this story, so I'm just going to share what stood out to me this time. I think that Anne's awareness of herself was pretty incredible. I know people who are much older and they still don't have that kind of self-awareness. I was also impressed at her ability to admit her faults, even in a diary. Also, since I read the book the first time, I have had the opportunity to visit the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam. That was probably about 20 years ago now, and it is exactly as I had imagined it, even back then. The bookcase is there, the staircase going up is very narrow, and the rooms were exactly as I had imagined. When we were there, we weren't able to take pictures inside, but I will show you the outside and the picture of me next to the statue of Anne. This experience was incredible, and reading the book this time meant that I could really imagine, what Anne was talking about when she talked about the annex and described it. And then the other thing that I remember being aware of on my first read, but it was even more prominent this time, was the hope that remained, even though that they were living in hiding. They had to be quiet. They had a number of close calls. Tensions would have been so high, and Anne does talk about how, people got on each other's nerves. But I think this was more real to me, this read. And every once in a while, Anne would say something so profound about people in general and humanity and her hopes and dreams. So this is really an incredible piece of literature. Anne talked in her diary about possibly publishing it. That was her dream, but I'm sure that she could never have imagined the impact that her diary has had on the world. So thanks again to AJ for hosting this read-along. I'm really glad that I read this again. This book would be for anyone who hasn't read this yet. I think that Anne's Diary is one of those books that everyone should probably read at some point in their lives. Also, if you were interested in learning about the Holocaust and if you want to get a young person's perspective, then this is a good one for that. The next book was another group read, and it begins like this. As they neared the corner, Mungo halted and shrugged the man's hand from his shoulder. And this is from Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart, which I read with the amazing Up to No But Good book club, which includes AJ from AJ Dunn Reads and Writes, Shelley from Shelley Swearengen's Library, Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and Fraser from Fraser Simon's Springboard Thought, who all have channels, and I will link those channels below. And the group also includes our friends and subscribers, Deb, Sonia, and Angela. And I think for those of us who read the book, everyone liked it. It definitely sparked a lot of conversation, and everyone in the group could identify with this book, and really specifically with Mungo to some degree. So it actually ended up being a really fantastic group read, for that reason. If you have been watching my channel for, I'd say the last year, then you know that I loved Shuggie Bain, Douglas Stuart's debut novel. It was in my top list for last year, and I loved Young Mungo, but not as much as Shuggie Bain. So there are a lot of similarities, which I was aware of going in because I watched Scott's review from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and he did an incredible job summarizing this book, and I can leave a link to that video in the description box below, so you can check it out. I think that Douglas Stuart's writing is incredible, and it didn't take long before I kind of remembered that, and I was like, this guy can write, I loved Young Mungo, and I loved the relationship he has with James. The story is quite sad, and when horrible things happen to Mungo, it is very gut-wrenching. The relationship that Mungo has with his mother is in some ways similar to the relationship that Shuggie Bain had with his mother, although, I thought that it was more intense in Shuggie Bain. I did like how this one ended. To me, it offered hope, even though horrible things happened and Mungo's in a tricky situation, there was still hope. So this was definitely worth a read. You do have to be prepared for all of the emotions, and there are some things that, might be triggering for people, so just be aware of that. But I'm looking forward to seeing what Douglas Stuart writes next, because this is 2 for 2 so far. So this book would be for anyone who enjoyed Shuggie Bain. If you like, books that punch you in the gut, if you are interested in reading stories with queer characters. And I also think, just to experience Stuart's writing, it's totally worth it. The next book begins, David had a troll in his house. And this is from A Troll in the House by David Renaud. Full disclosure here that I do know John, the author, and his wife and their 2 sons. So when I saw that John had put out a book, I wanted to support him. John is a police officer. Actually, I think John's a retired police officer now, and he is a military vet. So it comes as no surprise that he would have some experience with PTSD. And this is a fictional book in which PTSD is personified by a troll, which you can see on the cover here. And John is a talented artist, so he drew this picture. This is a very quick read. It's like 20 pages. So this isn't a huge commitment. And as I was reading it, I was thinking that it does for PTSD what I Had a Black Dog. It's called I Had a Black Dog, His Name Was Depression by Matthew Johnstone. What that book does for depression. And in this story, the main character, David, has a troll that he often tries to hide or get rid of. And of course he can't. And it's how David learns to live with that troll. So this would be good for anyone interested in the topic of PTSD. And if you are, looking for a quick read, it's also a way of approaching an important subject without going into really great depth, but it still, gets the point across. The next book was a buddy read, and it begins, The christening party took a turn when Albert Cousins arrived with gin. And this is from Commonwealth by Ann Patchett, which I read with Gloria Thompson. And I will leave a link to Gloria's channel below. She has a great channel, and she was a lot of fun to buddy read with. This is my second book by Ann Patchett, and I still do want to read more. I've read The Dutch House, which is still my favorite of hers, but I enjoyed this one too. This story focuses on two families, the Keatings and the Cousins, and they become intertwined after an affair. And the way the story is told is in like snippets or snapshots of their lives and in alternating perspectives. And things are revealed slowly as we learn about each of the kids. So the story kind of jumps all over the place, and sometimes you know that something has happened, but you don't know what that something is yet. So I liked Ann Patchett's writing. I loved that she was able to plunk us into a baptismal party with everyone there and among family drama, and it wasn't overwhelming. And I also liked her use of symbols. So like, for example, when I first got this edition, I thought, oh, how cool, an orange on the cover. They must be doing something on the covers for these editions in particular. But it actually did have to do with the story. So oranges were a symbol of orange juice and California and connection. So what I didn't really care for was the ending. It really fell flat for me, and I believe Gloria had the same reaction. And I also agree with Gloria that, I didn't love any of the characters. Now, I don't necessarily have to love or dislike a character, but there has to be some kind of connection, and that was lacking in this one. However, I'm glad that I read it. There was plenty about it that I did like, and I'm looking forward to reading, another Ann Patchett, hopefully soon, hopefully before the end of the year. So this book would be for anyone who enjoys literary fiction, stories about families, and for readers who don't mind, that jumping back and forth in time. So next on my list is another fiction book from an author that I really enjoy, and it begins like this. Ove is 59, and this is from A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman, and it's translated from the Swedish by Henning Koch, or Koch, I'm not sure. Now, I've heard the name pronounced Ove, Ove, Uve, but for now, I'm just going to say Ove. Okay, so this is Backman's debut novel, and it has had so much hype. I've read almost everything else by Backman. I still need to read Britt Marie Was Here and Things My Son Needs to Know About the World. But this has been sitting on the back burner for a long, long time, so I'm glad that I finally got to it. Backman quickly became a favorite writer of mine when I read Beartown and Us Against You, and I am anxiously awaiting for the third book in that trilogy, or that series, I don't know if it's going to go further, which comes out later this year. So if you don't already know the story about A Man Called Ove, it is about a cranky, bitter old man, 59, he's not that old, who is ready to end it all. And unfortunately, Ove has a new neighbor, and they keep getting in the way of his plans. And they are kind to him, even though he's cranky and grumpy, and he's not always that nice to them. But Ove keeps putting off what he's planning to do to help them. And although, he wouldn't want to admit it, he ends up liking them. And perhaps, he even needs them. So there are some funny parts. And again, Backman is a genius at, making something funny when he's writing something serious. Like, there's themes like suicide and grief. There's also themes of neighbors and needing community. I was expecting this book to be one of my favorites of Backman's, but it's actually not. I liked it, but I have enjoyed the Beartown series and Anxious People. Those would be my best so far. I have seen the Swedish film, and I thought that it was well done. And the American version is coming out on Christmas Day of this year. So I'm looking forward to that. It's starring Tom Hanks. and it's called A Man Called Ove. So I will definitely be checking that out around Christmas time. So this book is a good read for anyone who is, already a fan of Fredrik Backman, for readers who like, a bit of humor, and if you want to read the book before the movie comes out, this is your chance. The next two books are also fiction. They were my favorite reads of the month, and I'm going to say they might even be my favorite reads of the year. The first one begins, "Hope is a coin I carry, an American penny given to me by a man I came to love." And this is from The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah, which I read with my book club. This is the fourth book that our book club has read by Kristin Hannah, and it's I think it's the sixth book that I've read of hers, and I must say I have enjoyed all of them. I thought that this one was so well done. I felt like I was part of the story. It begins in Texas in 1921 when the main character, Elsa Wolcott, is 25 years old, and her life so far has been kind of sheltered since she had rheumatic fever when she was 14. And she doesn't consider herself attractive, and what she really wants to do, she wants to go to college to learn literature. She wants to be a teacher or a writer, and her family, thinks that she is being hysterical, and they are all about looks and perceptions. And then Elsa meets Rafe Martinelli, and her world changes forever. When Elsa becomes pregnant, her family disowns her, and the Martinellis take her in. And the story then skips forward to 1934, and Elsa and Rafe have a daughter and son, but things are becoming unbearable with the drought, and people are starting to leave to go west, where they've heard there is work. And there are mixed feelings about what to do, and when Elsa makes a decision, basically in order to protect her family, they will live in very difficult circumstances. So here's what I loved about this book. I felt like I knew each character, and I either really liked them or I really disliked them. I loved the relationship between Elsa and Rafe's parents. And Elsa and Rafe's daughter is, a typical preteen teenager, and their son is a sweetheart. The descriptions of their living situation and the suffering of the people is palpable. I also loved the contrast between Elsa and her daughter. They both showed strength, but in very different ways, and the story, didn't take an easy way out. Kristin Hannah brings you along in the suffering as well, and she does not let up. This story was so well told and has only confirmed again for me that I really like this author. So I think that she has, become an auto-buy author for me. This book is, I would say it's good for anyone who is interested in the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, which was something that I really knew nothing about. If you like strong female characters, and if you like to feel, like you were part of the story and part of the action, even when that is uncomfortable, then this book would be for you. The next book that is perhaps one of my favorites of the year starts like this. "It was Irwin that started all the dying." And this is from Ragged Company by Richard Wagamese. And if you have been around for like a minute or two, you already know that Richard Wagamese is one of my absolute favorite authors, and this book has one of the most gripping first paragraphs and first chapters I've ever read. Throughout the entire book, there are, just some beautiful and profound sentences that just get into your soul. And this was actually also a book club read from a few months ago, and I never finished it. I had started it, and I knew that I was going to love it, but I wasn't giving it the time it deserved, so I set it aside. And I'm so glad that I finally got back to it because it's so good. The story begins with Amelia One-Sky telling us how her parents and brothers all die, and how she went to what she knows, which was the street, and she got involved in drinking and drugs. And when she eventually quits drinking, she is homeless. And she is known as One for the Dead. We then meet other characters who are known as Timber, Double Dick, and Digger. And they have kind of formed a chosen or found family, and one day during a cold snap, they go to the movies to escape from the cold. And there they meet Granite Harvey, who used to be a journalist. And the four homeless people become film junkies. They see movies like Big, Rain Man, Stealing Home, Field of Dreams, E.T., Back to the Future, and the movies become meaningful to them, and each one of them, kind of likes certain ones for different reasons. They call themselves Ragged Company, and the story is told from alternating perspectives of these five characters, because what was originally thought to be a chance meeting with Granite becomes, much more involved, and especially when they find a cigarette package that has a winning lottery ticket. They have won $13.5 million, but they aren't able to claim the prize money because they don't have the proper identification in order to do that. So they ask Granite for help. And this changes their lives forever, and not always for the better. So each character is so distinct. They each have a very believable backstory. And although winning the lottery for them, could seem far-fetched, the way it is treated is done so well. Wagamese really gives you insight to life on the street, what being homeless means, how people survive, and what is important to them. So this was just a magnificent story, and I would say that it's my favorite of the year so far at this point. So this is a good read for anyone interested in stories about real life issues told in a fictional way, for anyone who is interested in reading Richard Wagamese, which should be everyone because he's so great, and if you like alternating perspectives and well-developed characters. Next, I have two poetry collections. Both of them are about the pandemic. The first begins on March 11th. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic. And this is from Friends Without Bodies by Brendan McLeod, who is a Canadian musician from Ontario. And I've mentioned before that I haven't really wanted to read about the current pandemic. But when I was sent this book, I found that in poetry, it seemed to be okay. And in this collection in particular, there are, just so many good poems. So the poems are from March of 2020, and they document what was happening. So each month, it starts with some statistics and what was happening, like the man who shot 22 people in Nova Scotia, the killing of George Floyd, and he even mentions at one point, the whole idea about people dreaming more. And if you've been watching, my channel for, a little while now, you might remember that I had mentioned that a couple of times, that I was dreaming a lot and more vividly, and I found out that I wasn't a freak. So the poems themselves are exceptional. He really captures what it felt like going shopping, trying to fill a day, not being able to see people. There's one poem in particular where he talks about grandparents finding new passwords to communicate with their grandchildren. And he just has a really interesting way with words and describing things. There's some really good lines that just capture a wealth of thoughts and feelings. So I will be keeping my eye out if Brendan McLeod publishes anything else. So this would be good for poetry lovers, people looking to put words to the experience of the pandemic. And I think that this will be especially good, in a few years when we're looking back, so that we don't forget what it was really like. The second collection of pandemic poetry that I read begins. I woke to the sound of birds whispering about the humans, and I couldn't tell any of you yet because you were all, including the dog, sound asleep, and the peace that filled the house was like a giant breath. And this is from Il Virus by Lillian Necakov. Gotta make sure I say the name correctly. First of all, I love this cover, and this collection was written over 78 days when Toronto was in a lockdown. There are 113 poems about the mundane actions and the deep feelings we all probably experienced during the first wave of the pandemic. There were a few of these poems that I liked, but I found a lot of them could have been about something else and not necessarily a pandemic. So I'm not sure how to describe it, but these poems did not resonate with me as much as the last collection. I think it's worth a read, and I think that this book would be good for, again, any poetry lovers, anybody interested in pandemic poetry in particular. The final 3 books that I read were during Kwibuka, which means to remember in Kinyarwanda, but specifically it is used during the 100 days of mourning and remembering, especially the people who died during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. And I have talked about Kwibuka before and have shared many things about Rwanda, my connection to Rwanda, and I have suggested many books about Rwanda and the 1994 genocide. So I will put links to those videos below, so if that is something that you want to check out and if you're interested in it, you can have a look at those. So the 100 days begins in early April and it goes until July. And the books that I read for Kwibuka, I read them all in June. So the first one that I'm going to talk about begins like this. There is no better liche than Our Lady of the Nile. This is from Our Lady of the Nile by Scholastique Mukasonga, and it is translated from the French by Melanie Mauthner. And I have been wanting to read this author for quite some time now, and this book was shortlisted for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, so I thought that I would check it out first. This story takes place pre-genocide, so it takes place at a Catholic boarding school for girls, and each chapter focuses on a different girl, mostly Hutu, as there are only 2 Tutsi students that attend this school. And the characters and the anti-Tutsi mentality of the book foreshadow what is to come in the 1990s. The girls and the white teacher and the statue of Mary are all used to create a smaller version of the hatred and teachings that led to the genocide. And I understood what the author was trying to do here, and there were parts of this story that I thought were brilliant, and they were really good, especially when, they want to change the statue of Mary because her nose looks too much like a Tutsi. I didn't love this book, though. There were no characters that I particularly liked. The story didn't have a lot of plot, but as a microcosm for what happened, it totally makes sense. So this has also been adapted to a film, and I would love to see the film if I get a chance. So I would say that this book is for anyone who already has a fairly good understanding of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis, or as a companion piece for a book with, some more facts and concrete information, just in order to compare the little world that Mukasonga created here and the reality of what actually happened. The next book that I want to talk about begins like this. Often in the middle of one of those never-ending chores that fill a woman's day, sweeping the yard, shelling and sorting beans, weeding the sorghum patch, tilling the soil, digging sweet potatoes, peeling and cooking bananas, my mother would pause and call out to us her 3 youngest daughters, not by our baptismal names, Jeanne, Julienne, Scholastique, but by our real names, the ones given to us at birth by our father, names whose meanings, always open to interpretation, seems to sketch out our future lives. Umubayeye, Uwamubairura, Mukasonga. I hope I got those names right. This is from The Barefoot Woman, also by Scholastique Mukasonga, which is translated from the French by Jordan Stump, and I liked this book a little bit more than the other one. This is actually a memoir, and it's a tribute to Scholastique Mukasonga's mother. And this is also pre-genocide, but it is obvious that the trouble is brewing, and the author shares memories of her mother and, how resourceful she was in finding ways to keep her children safe from the violence that was coming. And each chapter is about a topic like bread or sorghum, and then the importance of sorghum in Rwanda. There's a chapter on beauty and marriage, on medicine. So this book, like the other one, talks about the expectations of women and what it means to be a woman in Rwanda. And within each chapter, we learn about the life of Tutsis, and in particular, Mukasonga's family. So this obviously has a much more personal feel to it than the other book. And Mukasonga has 2 other books that have been translated to English. And I have the one called Cockroaches on my shelf, which is probably the one I'll read next. It's another memoir of her family during the genocide. She had over 30 people from her family killed in the genocide. So that's one that I will eventually get to. The final book that I read for Kwibuka Reads, and the last one for my wrap-up list, starts like this. There is a joke among residents and frequent visitors to Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda, that if you blink twice, you will see a building that wasn't there just the other day. This is from Rwanda Inc. by Patricia Crisafulli and Andrea Redmond, and this is a non-fiction book that was published in 2012. And the publication date in this case is important because it's been another 10 years, and this story has only continued, so it would be a whole new book, I think, at this point. Basically, this book is about how Rwanda has gone from a country devastated by genocide to a country that is now seen as a blueprint for other developing countries around the world. And so this book came out 2 years before I visited Rwanda in 2014. And I know from personal experience that the people of Rwanda take great pride in their country and the hard work they have put into rebuilding government, infrastructure, education, healthcare, and protecting the environment. And this book, talks about all of those things and gives a lot of praise to the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. And at the time the book was written, Kagame was only supposed to be president until I think it was 2015 or something like that, or maybe 2017. But as we know, he is still president today, and there's controversy around Paul Kagame. The book doesn't shy away from that, but regardless of where you stand in the controversy, there is no denying that good things are happening in Rwanda. And there are things that they are doing that the rest of the world, could learn from. So this book would be good for anyone who is interested in developing countries or learning how Rwanda has changed so drastically in less than 20 years at the time the book was published. And that is all of the books I read in June. Again, if you are looking for books about the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda, then I will leave a link to other Kwibuka Reads videos to check out. And there will be suggestions there that, might be more suitable if you are just learning about Rwanda or about the genocide. So please let me know if you have read any of these, or if you are interested in reading any of these. I'd love to hear about that. What books did you read in June that you absolutely loved that you think I would be interested in? I'm always happy to get your recommendations and hear about those. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.